headline was very much what we'd expected, another 2p cut in national insurance. You could have made a different decision. You could have used some of what we call that headroom to actually go into public services. Why did you make a different choice and go for cutting national insurance?
Well, we've seen a huge amount of investment in public services just from today. You know, we saw NHS is getting over £5 billion, £2.5 billion next year. This is significant investment. We also saw a significant investment through the public sector productivity programme in special educational needs schools, in police. But what we have done more broadly is taken the public through a very difficult time, right? We spent £400 billion during COVID, £100 billion supporting people through the energy price shock. But we've had to take difficult decisions. But because of the plan, the economy is turning a corner. And now we're able to give working people back some of their money through tax cuts.
As you say, some of their money, because the overall tax burden is still going up. And we have to be honest with voters and with the electorate. Let's just show the graph here. Tax as a percentage of GDP. So despite what was announced today and despite what was announced in the autumn statement, you can see there that by 2020...
Thing is, remember when Laura Trott just had no idea what the numbers were? In an interview on Radio 4, I think it was with Nick Robinson, or it might have been Evan Davis. It was Evan Davis, actually, wasn't it? Yeah. And Evan Davis was actually, gave her so many opportunities for her to just kind of change her mind and go with the official figures that he had to hand, and she continued getting it wrong. Just completely humiliating herself on the radio by not knowing any of the numbers. It's really weird how there's not going to be like a Diane Abbott moment, is there? It's not going to be called a Laura Trott moment moving forward at all, is it? Isn't it weird how the Tories can get away with this? I bet loads of people have forgotten about Laura Trott's massive moment where she forgot about all of them, what the numbers meant, or what the numbers even were, whether going up or down. In the same way that everybody remembers Diane Abbott for like one time getting the numbers wrong in one interview. Yeah, she trots out any old stuff. Hey!
28, 29, the forecast, the figures from the Office for Budget Responsibility, it's still going to reach that record high. Tax levels at 37.1%. Taxes are going up.
Because of the steps that we've taken in the fiscal events, over the last 4 fiscal events, it's 0.6% lower than it would have been. But I'm not shying away from the fact, Joe, I'm absolutely not.
Right.
In fact, we
so
have
you
taken
can
very
stay clear to everyone,
decisions.
tax is going up. Overall tax burden is rising and will continue to do so.
But think about the individual people within that. We've always said, the people with the broader shoulders, we are asking to take most of the burden.
But the biggest cause of the rising tax burden is because of fiscal drag. The biggest cause of the rising tax burden is the fact that the tax brackets for working people, not asset owners, not the super rich, but working people, those brackets are not being increased with inflation. That's the reason why the tax burden is continually increasing, and why for even a nurse on a modest income, the national insurance cut over the 5-year period still doesn't make up for the increase in tax because of fiscal drag in real terms. So her trotting out, this line about who pays the tax or the broadest shoulders are the people who pay capital gains tax, like landlords and private investors into property, who you're also cutting taxes for. Unless, they're very specific broader shoulders of those with holiday lets or those who smoke and vape. As if, poor and rich people don't smoke and vape. I agree with these tax increases. I think excise duty on these kind of products is good. But that hasn't got to be part of the lie that you're telling here about trying to make sure that the broader shoulders pay more tax, when that's explicitly not what you're doing.
And then we're doing that in order to allow working people to have a lower tax burden. Someone on the national living wage, their taxes will be 35%, their take-home pay will be 35% higher than it would have been otherwise. And that is really important. The distributional impacts of this are very different.
But all you're doing...
But it's not redistributive at all. You're not doing any redistribution. You've not had any increase in taxes on the actual rich whatsoever, apart from a very small non-dom tax status. And that's not an increase in taxes. That's just a changing of a tax rule to bring more people into having taxable income. That's not the same as having a tax rise, having a wealth tax, a new tax on somebody else. You're just changing the rules on how some people get taxed. That's not the same as a tax rise on the rich. You've not done any of that at all.
doing is you are giving back, as you quite rightly said, some of what you've taken away. Because of those tax thresholds having been frozen over a considerable amount of time, anyone who earns any more money gets dragged into higher rates of tax, and they are far bigger across the board than what you are giving them back in national insurance cuts. In fact, we looked at some of the figures, and the combined effect of a 4% cut in national insurance and the threshold freezes between 2021 and this April would mean that people earning less than £25,000 are worse off.
I think it's important that we look at this.
See what I mean? They think, well, we're not going to get votes from these poor people, so let's throw bungs at middle class people on £80,000. Here, have some child benefit. Or you're on £50,000 a year. Oh, you're going to be saving £900 over the course of multiple different budgets that we've cut national insurance by. Or you earn £25,000. You're just above minimum wage. You get nothing. In fact, we're going to tax you more during a cost of living crisis where you can't even afford to live, so that some fucker on a middle income, can get an extra nice bottle of wine or go on an extra foreign holiday. It's bullshit.
Over a
but is that
period.
true?
Well, I think the average earner has the lowest effective tax rate now since 1975. Right, that is a really important thing. So it is, and for people, as I said, on the lowest money, on the national living wage, they are 35% better off since 2010.
If you earn less than £25,000, average wage, you are worse off. So when people are asked, do you feel better off or do you feel worse off as a result of Conservative governments, they won't just feel worse off, they are worse off.
That's not true since 2010. I think that's really important. That's not true since... And we did some...
What about all of the wage stagnation since 2010? What about all of the wage stagnation, the supply-side labour market reform, the anaemic growth, the productivity failures, all of the difference in lack of service provision? You've got to remember, on top of the fact that people don't even have as much money normally because of inflation making their paychecks worth less in real terms. But on top of that, for those last 14 years, the people who fundamentally rely on public services, which is the bottom half of the income distribution, have had their access to these things completely slashed. It's been reduced substantially because of austerity, not just in the health service, not just in schools, but in provision on welfare, in terms of social housing, council housing, access to council amenities they've all been sold off to. The people who really need the redistributive effects of good quality public services now get even less than they used to because of austerity. So that they are fundamentally worse off now, Laura. That's just complete nonsense to say that they're better off. Because not only have their wages been not exactly rising in the strongest of terms, but what they're getting back from the state has been slashed by gigantic amounts. All the while, your government was giving quantitative easing to the financial sector.
Huge personal, in terms of the basic rate, increasing that, the income tax threshold. So that is the difference, because we made those big changes in the tax-free threshold at the beginning.
Shall we have a look at that? You say that, but let's have a look at that graph again. Tax as a percentage of GDP since 2010. Taxes have gone up.
Yes. I agree with you in terms of the overall tax burden.
Well,
because
that's what
we
we're
had to make
looking at.
No, but absolutely. I've been very clear at the beginning. We had to make some difficult decisions. We spent £400 billion during COVID. We have to pay that back. That is a fundamental Conservative principle. We've had to do things that, as a Conservative...
No, you issued bonds. Half of that was even quantitative easing. There's loads of new money that was created during that period, as well as bonds that were issued. And you don't actually have to pay that back. Loads of this money is just bonds that get paid back to the Bank of England, which we own and who prints the money.
I feel very uncomfortable doing, but we've always asked those with the broadest shoulders to take the biggest burden, and we are trying to give back now because our plan is working, because inflation is falling, because real wages are rising. We are able now to cut working people's taxes.
All right, one of the things that, in fact...
Except you're not actually cutting the taxes because of fiscal drag. You're just lying again, Laura. I mean, you're absolutely right in chat there talking about the 80k guy from Question Time, because that is the target voter. They do lie to these people about where they lie, not just in the tax bracket, but in the economic spectrum as well. In the people who earn like 60 to 100,000 pounds probably don't think of themselves as being that well off. They think themselves as not even necessarily that far above median income. The 80k guy is a bit of a maverick in that regard. but they don't see themselves as being necessarily substantially well off because they get used to the lifestyle. Right? They get used to the kind of conspicuous consumption that they can engage in. As that drops, they get angry with the government, even though none of us can even do the conspicuous consumption. We live on worse property, we don't own houses, whatever it might be, on the lower end of the income scale. And so they are more likely to throw their toys out of the pram when things like this happen. And it's also why they get targeted by the policies that we're seeing here. When national insurance is mostly actually being beneficial to people on those middle to high incomes, rather than fiscal drag, which is worse for the people at the extremes of the economic distribution. These middle and higher income earners are the ones who are the natural Conservative Party base, the aspirational types. And the only way that you can pander to these people is by continually convincing them that they're not wealthy. They're just normal. Even though on 50, 60, 70, 80,000 pounds a year, like 70,000 is double the median wage. Like you're firmly in the top quartile of earners at that point. And they don't realise it, because as soon as they would realise it, they would realise their class interests lie in a different position, rather than just being honest to goodness working people. It's why the working people rhetoric is used by the Labour Party, because people on 70, 80k, they see themselves just as normal working people, rather than you people who actually have quite a lot of wealth.
Just had the Institute for Fiscal Studies head here, Paul Johnson. One of the things he wanted to know, even before the budget, is that public services, some public services, are going to be squeezed quite dramatically, he thinks, and he wanted to know where is the axe going to fall. You're keeping a 1% increase above inflation, but of course that's across all public services. Some will get more and others will get cut. Where are you going to cut?
So you're very right to point out that the overall size of the pie will be going up. This is not austerity. The amount that we are increasing
Well, how do we know unless we know what you're going to cut?
Well, because the overall kind of the planned cuts from 2010 to 2015 was minus 2.1%. Right? So this is going up. Resource spending is going up by 1% overall. So it's very important that people at home know that it's increasing.
Yeah, hang on. That is 1%. You're right. Going up. It's not that much, but anyway, 1% above inflation. But not every area in government spending is going to get that increase because we have these unprotected departments. And those are the areas that are not guaranteed those increases. And they've already had cuts. Local government, Home Office and Justice. Where are the cuts going to fall? People will want to know.
I think it's really important.
This is a time in which our courts literally cannot process enough claims. They're absolutely full. The prisons are full. Barristers are on strike because of underpay and lack of pay because of, because of frozen budgets and things like that. And on top of that, local government funding already squeezed by up to 40% over the last 14 years. They can do even further council budget cuts to make up for the fact that they're ring-fencing other departments whilst also not increasing public spending enough to ensure that every department gets a slice of the pie, as she would call it. She won't admit it, despite the fact that most of these departments that she's talking about here are already basically on their knees at this point.
Local government, the amount of money they're getting up next year will go up by 7.5%. That is not them being cut. Their money is going up significantly. We just put an extra £600 million into local government. But also, I just want to emphasise, over this Parliament, we've increased the overall spending on resource by 2.3%, right? So it's gone up over this Parliament. It's going to go up over the next Parliament. But what we're doing is making sure that we are, and the Chancellor made this clear in his speech today, that we're spending this money very productively. So we announced a civil service kind of productivity plan today, which is putting money in, making investments in areas we know are expenses, we know are driving up council costs, for example, children's homes, special educational needs, schools, all those things. They will help save money and make sure that we are spending taxpayers' money more efficiently, because it's not just about what you put in, it's about what you get out.
But there will be...
Yeah, of course, all of these efficiency savings, all of this more efficient running that we would been told for 14 years we'd find them. Like, if you've not found the efficiency savings now, after 14 years of continually asking from them from the public sector, turns out they weren't there to begin with at all. And what that actually means is a reduction in service provision, because that's what it's meant entirely for the last 14 years. Again, they kept telling us they could find efficiency savings, and they do not bloody exist. They're just not there.
Tens of billions of pounds of cuts to unprotected areas.
Well, that depends on a spending review, which we are not doing.
Faisal?
The strategy of the Conservative Party since 2010 was to take people out of the tax system. You
Yes.
just put them all back in again now with millions more in the tax system, 3 or 4 million now more dragged into the high rate tax band, creates all sorts of problems with red tape. And you've taken that tax money, which was far bigger than you anticipated when the freeze came in, and now you want some credit for giving about a third of it back.
Because the economy has been doing well, and because of that, the tax take has...
We're in a recession. We're literally in recession, 2 quarters of negative growth. You can't say the economy is doing well and we're literally in recession. That's just abject nonsense. We've been doing poorly economically for the last 14 years, but the fact that you say recession now is an economic recovery, it's just like they must think that we're idiots. They must think that we're stupid. I mean, I would be exasperated too, to be fair, Vintage Soup, if my job was interviewing people like Laura Trott all day. Somebody in chat said that you just imagine her saying, "Daddy, I want a pony." And she literally is exactly that kind of person, exactly the kind of thing that I would imagine somebody from this kind of background saying. I wonder if she went to Oxbridge. Let's have a look. We always like attacking people's backgrounds on this channel, especially if they're conservatives. Or she grew up in Surrey. And she went to Oxford. Although she didn't go to private school. She actually went to state school. So I guess you could call her Oxford education at least somewhat earned. Unlike the people who went to private school.
Increased, and that has also meant that, and because of inflation falling, the debt interest payments also gone down, so that's increased. So that has allowed us, a little more headroom as well. But what we have done, as I've said, is make sure that where we can and where it's responsible to do so, we start the process of cutting people's taxes again. This is not the end of the story.
Why not just stop the freeze that's happening for the next 3 years, rather than seek some great credit?
This is not the end of the story. We're doing things where it's fiscally responsible to do so. We're also doing things that aren't inflationary. You'll know that it's very important that this national insurance cut isn't inflationary. And overall, the OBR says that these package of measures will reduce...
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, tax cuts aren't necessarily inflationary. Again, we've just come out of a very long period of cost-push inflation. Most people don't have any money. Savings rates have massively dropped. People aren't saving much money. People are taking money out of their savings to deal with the cost of living crisis. So I don't think a tax cut is necessarily inflationary in the way that a monetarist would like to think so. Or even a Keynesian might like to think so, because I think that demand will just shift in where it gets spent, as people are more likely to start saving again if they aren't spending all of their money on bills or on consumption. But she's basically admitting, though, so, well, we couldn't cut taxes because it would be inflationary, so we're just going to reduce one tax in terms of national insurance just because it's optically good, and then stealthily use fiscal drag to recoup those losses and to make sure that we aren't doing anything inflationary on the back end. Basically, because they know that they can't actually do what they want to do, which is reduce the tax burden overall, so they just have to pretend that they are, so that they can get into the good books of the electorate and run on it on an electoral campaign. That's it. That's all that they're doing here. It's just optics.
Reduce inflation next year by 0.2%.
You're now running the public finances very hot. The headroom is now just below nine billion, just a few billion. Just a tiny move in the forecasts could wipe that out. Are you going to be the Chief Secretary writing the letter saying there's no money left to your successor?
Well, just to be clear, public sector net borrowing by the end of the forecast will be at a low which is historic for the last couple of decades, right? It'll be just over 1%. That is with a large degree of headroom on the borrowing figure. So
not on the debt one, though.
But not on the debt one, you're right. It's £9 billion on the debt one. But it is... We are being very responsible with this, right? We have managed to cut people's national insurance without increasing borrowing over the period from the autumn statement to 28-29. We are doing this in a very fiscally responsible way.
That's not what fiscally responsible means. Saying we're not borrowing as much as we were before, when borrowing to invest is literally what this country has been crying out for the entirety of the last 14 years, is the opposite of being fiscally responsible. It's fiscally irresponsible to prioritise a fiscal rule or prioritise a number on a graph over the real economic outcomes of your society. People can't afford to be able to live in this country. Schools are collapsing. The NHS is on its knees. We need investment. You're going to have to borrow to invest. And you saying, well, we're not going to do that, that's fiscal responsibility. That's just not true. That's fundamentally untrue. And again, it's this continual lie that we are told that not spending money is how you be fiscally responsible, rather than spending money well. Because I don't have an issue with the fact that the national debt has increased over the course of the Conservative government. The biggest issue I have is they've spent all that money and we have nothing to show for it. We've lost a load of assets. The financial sector's loving it. They got all the QE, remember? Where's the things we have to show for it? No HS2. No 40 new hospitals. Levelling up, complete wash. And that's the issue that we have. Not that you've not spent money, or that you have spent money. It's that you have spent money, but we've got nothing for it.
Can I talk about debt? Because shortly after becoming Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak gave a big speech where he said his government was going to deliver 5 key pledges, and one of them was on debt. We will make sure our national debt is falling so that we can secure the future of public services. Are you meeting
Don't get there off falling debt. She'll do an Evan Davis again.
that pledge?
So in the 5th year of the forecast, public sector net debt, excluding Bank of England, is due to fall from the 4th year. Public sector net debt overall is coming down.
Right, but that was your fiscal
She remembered her figures this time.
rule,
Yep.
that in the 5th year,
Yep.
debt would come down slightly from year 4. We've discussed that is a self-imposed, what the IFS call a very odd rule. In fact, we can see it here. In fact, it's going down from 93.2% to 92.9%. So
it's still higher than it is now. So actually, if that's the fiscal rule, that it goes down from year 4 to year 5, not that it goes down over the period in government, that actually means that Rachel Reeves's fiscal rule is more constrictive than Jeremy Hunt's is. Because Jeremy Hunt is just, year 4 to year 5, that's all that matters. Whereas Rachel Reeves is, over the course of the Parliament, debt to GDP ratio has to fall for that period. I didn't know that. I thought that Jeremy Hunt was using the same one as Rachel Reeves. But of course, as you say, Bilderberg, it's basically a rounding error. But really, it shouldn't matter. We should just invest in the things we need to invest in. As long as we're increasing supply, you won't be inflationary.
yes, you are meeting that fiscal rule. But I'm talking about the Prime Minister's pledge to make sure that national debt is falling. Is debt going to be higher or lower in 5 years' time than it is now?
So that is one measure. You've got it up on the screen.
Yeah, but answer that question. Is it going to be higher or lower?
That's public sector net debt, excluding the Bank of England. Public sector net debt, which is the overall figure, is coming down.
Right, but when people hear a pledge that says debt is going to be falling, you can assume they think debt is falling now.
Yep.
That
like I said, we are keeping within our fiscal rules. We're making sure borrowing has come down significantly, which is obviously a contributor to debt. By 28-29, it will be 1%, which is going to be a low for a couple of decades. So we are doing this in a very responsible way. And as I said, we're taking steps. And there are a couple of revenue raises in there today. This is not, we've really been clear that
tax
a very
on vapes and
open and honest
tax
that we
break.
are asking those with the broader shoulders to take the burden while we cut taxes for working people.
Right, just to go back to debt, is debt falling?
It's going up on this measure for the next 3 or 4 years. And then, as we have repeatedly described, it then sort of tails off at the end.
Right, but when you hear a pledge from the Prime Minister, which says, I am committing this government to national debt falling, they're not going to meet that pledge going into the election.
It's a little bit like the difference between the pledge and what the actual fiscal rule is. There was some degree of vagueness. We saw that on some.
I mean, that's because one of them was an outward thing they were saying to the public, and another one was just a guideline for the Chancellor to follow in his economic predictions. So, but essentially, Rishi Sunak was just lying. Like, his pledges were all lies. Like, we know this now. It's like, it's not surprising, really. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.